Good evening, and welcome again to the Canadian Orthodox Monastery of All Saints of North America. I realized we had said we would broadcast in different outside parts of the monastery, so we'd give a little tour of the monastery, but we're having a rather extreme heat wave in our part of the world right now, and it's been up as high as, I think, 42 in our district, in our region, which is, I don't know what is in Fahrenheit, perhaps 100 or a bit over. And it's been still at 9 o'clock in the evening, as it is now, very hot. And we're used to getting a little panicked when it gets up to, well, I suppose what would be 80 degrees in American in Fahrenheit. And here it is a bit over 100, or it has been. It's been broken all historic records of heat for this region, this area, and it's so hot that in Vancouver the streets were as bare as Tag Day in Aberdeen. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and record from the inside. You'll notice also I'm not wearing my kamilafka and veil this evening. I generally do, but it's even too hot for that. We had begun the Radio Orthodox Canada podcasts. Those of you who are interested in following the podcasts also, Radio Orthodox Canada, and you can find it in podcast directories. We've been talking about faith, the reasonableness and sensibility of faith, and so I'll just mention that, so anyone who wants to follow that can go to the podcast, Radio Orthodox Canada. I remember hearing a story some 25 or 30 years ago when I was a young deacon, so it would have been at least 35 years ago then, about a bishop in Greece, a Greek bishop, but in Egypt, in Alexandria. Extremely charitable. He lived a little above the poverty line, but in any case, whatever he had or whatever he received, he shared it with the poor around him. And he had not too much, but in any case, he became renowned for his kindness, generosity, compassion, and continuously giving away those things which he had. And some people in Alexandria had said, what a pity he isn't wealthy like some of the bishops or ones who've inherited money from family, because just think of how many good works and good deeds and how much he would do for the poor. And he'd often mentioned himself that he wished he had more to give. But it so happens that an uncle of his died, who owned a shipping company, left him a substantial amount of money. Well, suddenly he disappeared from Alexandria, turned up in Switzerland, left the priesthood altogether, and got married. And now that he was wealthy, he lived a very wealthy life. His whole lifestyle changed immediately. Sometimes we wonder why God doesn't give us the gifts that we want, thinking how much good we would do with them. And even calling to a certain special service to say, oh, if I had this rank, if I had this title, if I had this amount of money, if I had something, I would do a great deal of good with it. It's like people who come to the monastery and ask us to pray that they'll win the 649 lottery, or bless their lottery tickets, and they will say, oh, if I win the lottery, I'll pave the road at the monastery and help build a new church there, as if trying to trick God into helping them win the lottery. If they won that much money, maybe they would do something, maybe they wouldn't. But this story brings me to the next event we're going to take up in the Old Testament is about you. We can talk about both Samson and the sons of the high priest Eli. The sons of Eli were the priests of Israel, and Eli, of course, the hereditary priest. Now let's look at both of these groups of people. Samson, as we know, was born as a special result of a special prayer of his mother, and he was called to be one of the judges of Israel. There wasn't just one single judge at the time. There were a number of judges, but then ultimately there was one who had the greatest authority. Samson took the Nazirite vow. That's why his hair was uncut. He had quite long hair, like he bound at the back, much the way we see the hair of Jesus Christ bound in the icons, pulled to the back. Nazirite vow, now, he wasn't supposed to consume strong drink. He was supposed to live a kind of chastity, and a life especially consecrated to the service of God and of Israel. Well, we know the story, of course. He got involved with a woman from outside the holy nation, and he was also generally a rather angry person who was quite quick to vengeance. And when he was betrayed by his spouse, well, betrothed really, not really married, betrayed by his betrothed in the matter of a certain riddle that he had thought up and challenged the Philistines to learn, he became very angry and took a great deal of vengeance. But he also did carry out a war of attrition for Israel. Now, in the end, he was trapped by a very beautiful woman by the name of Delilah, and he began to have an affair with her, completely violating his Nazirite vow. Now, here's a man who was called from his mother's womb to God's service, given a special strength and power, and called upon to fulfill God's will in righteousness and justice. But his weaknesses led him into this particular bondage, and we know the story about Delilah cutting his hair. I think she had help doing it. In fact, there's some thought that perhaps he was even castrated at the time. Well, he lost his strength when his hair was cut. Now, his strength wasn't in his hair, it was in his Nazirite vow. The hair was a symbol and a part of that Nazirite vow, which he had broken and violated, and broken his relationship with God. And the cutting of his hair was symbolic of something that had already taken place within him, within his heart. Called to God's service and given this special strength, he nevertheless was not strong enough to bear up. He did not place his dependency totally on God, placed himself open to the kind of temptation that finally destroyed him. And in the end, his last act in this earthly life was to pull down the pagan temple on the worshippers. An act of vengeance, but also, of course, an act which God permitted in order to separate Israel from this kind of pagan idolatry. The sons of Eli were the priests of Israel by inheritance, by family, and yet the sons of Eli betrayed God. It wasn't simply that they offered incense improperly on the altar. They'd also been having sexual relations with women who were around the temple, seducing these women, and really sort of dragging the temple of the people of God down to the level of the temple prostitutes of the pagans round about them. Now, these were people who had every possibility to serve God and the nation, and yet they failed. Their own human passions and weaknesses overpowered them. Samson was given this great strength, and that was a part of what destroyed him. The children of Eli, the sons of Eli, were given the priesthood, authority, respect, and reverence in the community. But once they got that, and once they had that power, they could only misuse it. And this reminds us of the true nature of sin, the habitual misuse of our energies. So we often think that if we had certain gifts and certain power and certain wealth, we would do all sorts of good things. But would we? You see, the story of Eli's sons and of Samson is about us, about you.